Nobody from my own flesh and blood showed up to my wife's funeral service. Not my only son, Jason, and certainly not his newly minted bride, Ashley. They were far too preoccupied, celebrating their lavish, $300,000 wedding across town at a luxury resort, drinking imported champagne under elaborate floral arches while the organist played to rows of empty pews. I stood alone in the chill morning air at Harris Memorial Services, staring at the white roses covering my beloved wife's mahogany casket, flanked by 8 reserved, vacant chairs that should have been filled by our immediate family. They had made their decision weeks ago, coldly informing me across my own kitchen counter that my wife of 42 years was already gone, and that canceling their high society wedding would cost too much money in catering deposits. I buried her alone in the damp Texas soil, whispering my final goodbyes without a shoulder to lean against. But the moment the graveside service concluded, and I stepped back inside my empty home, my cell phone suddenly erupted with notifications. 47 missed calls in under 20 minutes, accompanied by a frantic, hyperventilating text message from my son that read, "Dad, what have you done?" Before I take you through the exact legal mechanics of how I turned my son's high society wedding reception into the most expensive financial reality check of his life, make sure to subscribe to the channel and write down in the comments below what time it is in your region right now. My name is Homer Coleman. I am 67 years old, and for 35 years in Austin, Texas, I have worked as a certified public notary while building Coleman Realty Group into a respected local enterprise. Throughout my adulthood, I always believed that family was the ultimate bedrock of existence, that blood was thicker than water, and that a father's duty was to protect his own, no matter the sacrifice. It is a bitter irony how life eventually teaches you that sharing blood simply creates a much larger mess when human character falls apart under the weight of greed. While the story I am about to tell you is a dramatized account, the strict realities of Texas property law, estate structuring, and the painful lessons about filial responsibility contained within these words are as real and binding as the seal on a notary stamp. The heartbreaking call from the oncology ward arrived in the pre-dawn darkness of an early Tuesday morning. My wife had slipped away peacefully in her sleep after a grueling 2-year battle with aggressive ovarian cancer that robbed her of her strength but never her grace. 42 years of shared morning coffees, quiet porch talks, and steadfast partnership vanished into the cold hospital air in a single heartbeat. The attending physicians gently pressed my hand and assured me that her quiet passing was a genuine blessing, that she had been spared the agonizing pain of the final stages. When you stand beside the empty hospital bed of the one human being on this earth who knew every hidden corner of your soul, who built your home from scratch and stood beside you when your bank accounts held less than $50, there is no such thing as a blessing. There is only a crushing emptiness that echoes through your ribs every time you draw a breath. My only son, Jason, is 34 years old and earns his living as a senior financial consultant for a prestigious wealth management firm in downtown Austin. He wears tailor-made Italian suits, checks his stock portfolio before brushing his teeth, and discusses leveraged market opportunities over $50 Sunday brunches. He was not always this cold calculator. I can still picture him at 7 years old, rushing across our front lawn to crash into my knees when I stepped out of my notary office, his cheeks smeared with chocolate from sneaking cookies before dinner. I remember spending 2 summer weeks teaching him how to ride a bicycle down our sloping asphalt driveway, his mother watching from the shaded porch with a proud smile that could illuminate any room. At his high school graduation, after receiving his diploma, he broke through the crowd, wrapped his arms tightly around his mother until she laughed, and promised right in front of me, "You are the absolute best mom in the world, and I am going to work every single day to make you proud of me." That tender, loyal boy began to evaporate exactly 4 years ago when Ashley Stewart swept into his orbit like a winter frost. Ashley is 31 years old, and she is beautiful in the exact same way a polished diamond is beautiful, sharp, icy, and prohibitively expensive to maintain. She was born into generational wealth and has never worked a day of hard labor in her life, unless you count curating aesthetic photographs and managing social media profiles designed to showcase luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. Her father, Richard Stewart, owns an extensive chain of high-end commercial car dealerships across Central Texas, while her mother, Patricia, spends her afternoons sipping champagne at exclusive country club luncheons, routinely treating any human being whose income falls below six figures as if they were replaceable pieces of patio furniture. From the first evening Jason brought Ashley to our home for dinner, both my wife and I recognized the predatory entitlement simmering beneath her practiced socialite smile. We kept our mouths shut because we wanted our son to be happy, and he appeared thoroughly mesmerized by her orbit. The transformation of my son did not happen overnight. It was a slow erosion of values, like watching expensive paint steadily peel away from a damp wall. First, Jason abruptly stopped attending our traditional Sunday family dinners, claiming his corporate workload and Ashley's vibrant social calendar left no room for weekend visits. Then, nearly 18 months ago, Jason approached us with an anxious proposition. He wanted to move back into our suburban home on Westlake Drive, the exact home I purchased 30 years ago and worked 80-hour weeks to pay off in full under the pretense that he needed to save money for future investments. 2 months after Jason unpacked his boxes, Ashley moved her designer luggage across my threshold without asking permission, offering a penny toward utilities, or showing embarrassment. Within 3 weeks, Ashley calmly declared that our spacious master bedroom on the second floor was the only room large enough to accommodate her wardrobe, forcing my dying wife and me to relocate into the cramped downstairs guest bedroom, under the excuse that the staircase was getting too difficult for my wife's arthritic knees. My wife never raised her voice or complained about being displaced in the home she had decorated with her own hands. She simply squeezed my fingers in the darkness of that downstairs room and whispered softly, "Let it go, Homer. They are young, and they are preparing to start a family of their own. We must be patient with them." But it was not fine, and deep inside my chest, I knew that nothing happening under my roof was even remotely normal or healthy. The morning after my wife took her last breath in the oncology ward, I called Jason's cell phone to break the news. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted and muffled by the sound of traffic. When I uttered the words that his mother had passed away, there was no sharp intake of breath or silence of grief. He simply exhaled a clipped sigh and replied, "Hey, Dad. Yeah, the hospital left a voicemail. Look, I am really sorry, but Ashley and I are right in the middle of a major venue coordination meeting. It's terrible, obviously, but we will sit down and talk about all of this later tonight, okay?" He terminated the call right then and there, without asking when the body was being released or offering assistance. 3 full, agonizing days dragged by before I saw my son and his bride in person inside the house we shared. I was sitting at the kitchen island at 7 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by stacks of sympathy cards and floral arrangement catalogs, trying to organize a dignified memorial service while my hands trembled from exhaustion. Ashley breezed into the kitchen wearing a crisp white linen resort dress, looking as though she had stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine, ignoring the grief-stricken atmosphere. Without looking at me, she poured herself espresso from my machine and asked coldly, "Is there any fresh almond milk in the fridge, Homer?" Jason strolled in seconds later, dressed in workout gear, his eyes glued to his smartphone screen. He barely glanced at the spread of funeral documents covering the marble countertop before muttering, "Morning, Dad. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. We really need to sit down and coordinate our schedule for the next 10 days. I slowly laid down my pen and stared up at the stranger wearing my son's features, feeling a heavy knot tighten inside my stomach. I informed him across the table that I was finalizing the dates for his mother's funeral and needed to confirm which morning next week worked best for our relatives. Jason stopped scrolling on his phone, exchanged a swift glance with Ashley, and shifted his weight. Ashley set her espresso cup down with a sharp clink, crossed her arms, and smiled her practiced socialite smile. "Homer," she said smoothly, her tone dripping with patience, "our wedding ceremony is formally scheduled and contracted for next Saturday, March 29th, at the Lakeway Luxury Resort. We have had this date locked into our calendar for 8 months. The catering team, the live orchestra, the celebrity photographer, and the grand ballroom are already paid for, and 200 embossed invitations have already been RSVP'd by the most prominent families in Austin. We simply cannot have a depressing funeral happening on the exact same weekend. The callousness of her words caused the kitchen to tilt beneath my feet. I turned my gaze toward Jason, expecting my son, the boy who had wept over his mother's scraped knee when he was 10, to tell his fiancée that his mother's final rights took absolute precedence over any party. Instead, Jason cleared his throat, looked down at his designer running shoes, and mumbled, "She's right, Dad. If we attempt to reschedule or postpone the Lakeway Resort booking right now, we would trigger cancellation penalty clauses and forfeit nearly $340,000 in deposits. Besides, Mom is already gone. She's resting in peace. Moving the memorial service back by 2 or 3 weeks isn't going to change anything for her. But canceling our wedding would destroy our financial standing and humiliate Ashley's parents in front of the country club board." My voice dropped, turning hollow, as I asked if they truly intended to proceed with a champagne-soaked party, while the woman who gave him life lay waiting to be buried. Ashley stepped 1 inch closer to the kitchen island, her heavy perfume choking the air out of my lungs. "Homer," she stated coldly, dropping the socialite smile entirely, "you have run a real estate business for over 30 years. You understand the basic principles of sunk costs and binding contracts. We are not postponing our special day just to sit in a gloomy chapel. And let us be completely honest about where things stand right now. Once you are no longer here to occupy this property, this house, and the family business will belong to us anyway. There is no point in creating financial losses that will subtract from our future equity." Right then, at precisely 8:15 on a Thursday morning, the veil dropped completely. I stared into Ashley's hard eyes and then at Jason's cowardly face, and I saw the raw truth my heart spent 2 years refusing to admit. They were not simply indifferent to my wife's passing. They were actively counting down the days until my heartbeat stopped. They looked at my aging body and saw nothing more than a temporary occupant sitting on an $890,000 real estate asset and a $1 million notary firm. I slowly gathered my funeral planning papers off the kitchen island, stacked them inside my leather folder, and looked my son straight in the eye. I quietly told both of them to get out of my kitchen immediately, and when Jason attempted to reach across the counter to touch my shoulder, I pulled back as though his hand were dipped in acid. As I walked out of the kitchen toward the downstairs bedroom, I heard Ashley whisper sharply to him, "Let him sulk. Once the wedding is over and we file the inheritance transition paperwork, we won't have to deal with his dramatic temper ever again." I locked the door of my downstairs bedroom, sat down on the mattress, and looked at the nightstand beside me. My wife's reading glasses still rested exactly where she had left them before her final hospital admission, folded neatly on top of her favorite paperback novel, which remained bookmarked at page 237. Overwhelmed by grief and burning clarity, my mind flashed back to an evening 6 months earlier, a memory that I had desperately tried to bury. I had returned home early from my notary office on a rainy Wednesday afternoon to retrieve commercial property files. Jason and Ashley had told me they would be out all day inspecting floral arrangements, but as I stepped quietly into the front entryway, I heard their voices echoing from the formal living room. They were drinking wine on my couch, laughing with mocking amusement. I had paused in the darkened hallway behind the partition wall and listened as Ashley complained about the decor of my house. "Honestly, Jason, I don't know how much longer I can stand living inside this 85-square-foot time capsule," she had laughed, clinking her wine glass against his. "Your father's taste screams 1985 suburban mediocrity. The very second we inherit the deed, the first thing we are doing is hiring a demolition crew to gut the entire ground floor. We will knock out that hideous kitchen partition, install imported Italian marble countertops, and convert his notary office into a temperature-controlled wine cellar." And I had stood frozen in the shadows as my own son chuckled in agreement, adding, "Don't worry, babe. Once Mom is gone, Dad won't have the emotional stamina to manage Coleman Realty Group anymore. We will sell off the commercial client contracts for at least $1 million, put him into one of those managed care retirement communities with supervised bingo nights, and use the capital to fund our investment portfolio. He won't even know what hit him." I had walked out of my front door that afternoon without making a sound, sat in my car in the rain for an hour, and tried to convince myself my son was blowing off steam that he would never follow through on such gaslighting. But now, sitting beside my dead wife's bookmarked novel, while her own son planned to drink champagne on the exact day of her burial, every piece of the puzzle snapped together with mathematical precision. They viewed me as an easily manipulated stepping stone. That because I had spent 35 years acting as a patient husband and father, I would roll over, sign estate transfer documents when requested, and fade quietly into a nursing home while they transformed my life's work into their personal playground. At 3 o'clock in the morning, while the house above me slept in deep silence, I rose from my bed and walked down the hallway into my home office. I switched on the desk lamp and stood surrounded by 4 heavy steel filing cabinets containing 35 years of legal records. As a certified notary public and real estate broker, I had spent over 3 decades witnessing, stamping, and executing thousands of property transfers, corporate charters, and last wills. I had spent my entire professional career protecting vulnerable clients from aggressive creditors and relatives who sought to exploit them during grief. I knew every line, every statute, and every procedural requirement of the Texas Property Code and the Texas Trust Code by heart. I pulled open the top drawer of my primary cabinet and lifted out my personal estate binder. Inside sat the original warranty deed for 2847 Westlake Drive, confirming sole ownership in my name, with an updated county tax valuation of $890,000. Beside it sat the corporate charters and stock certificates for Coleman Realty Group, valued at over $1 million in liquid assets and recurring management accounts. And right beneath them lay my current last will and testament, drafted 5 years ago when my wife first fell ill, explicitly naming Jason Coleman as the sole beneficiary of my entire estate upon our deaths. I looked at my signature on that will, executed with the blind trust of a father who believed his son would honor his legacy. Then I reached for a legal pad, picked up my gold-plated ballpoint pen, and began to write. Texas civil law contains a fascinating doctrine that ordinary citizens misunderstand. Most people falsely assume that estate planning only occurs after a person dies, when a probate judge opens a will and distributes assets to squabbling heirs. But that is only half of the law. Under Texas statute, a living, competent adult citizen possesses absolute lifetime authority to restructure, transfer, convey, or encumber any property they lawfully own while they are drawing breath. If that citizen establishes an irrevocable trust or charitable foundation during their lifetime, transfers their deeds and bank accounts directly into that entity, and appoints themselves as the controlling lifetime trustee, the transfer takes effect instantaneously. Once an irrevocable transfer is notarized, witnessed by non-beneficiaries, and recorded with the county clerk and secretary of state, it is permanently locked. No probate judge can overturn it, no aggressive estate attorney can contest it, and no entitled son can claim duress or mental incompetence, because the owner is not dead. He is alive, vigilant, and legally managing his own foundation. My hand did not shake a fraction of a millimeter as I drafted the structural blueprint across the pages of my legal pad. I compartmentalized my grief with the cold detachment of a seasoned notary reviewing a commercial merger. If Jason and Ashley wanted to celebrate under a floral arch, on the morning I lowered his mother into the earth, I would not attempt to stop them. I would let them wear their designer silk, drink their imported champagne, and smile for their celebrity photographer. But while they danced their first dance as husband and wife, I would systematically transfer every square foot of property, every corporate account, and every dollar of family equity into a fortress they could never breach. And when the music stopped, and they checked their smartphones at the conclusion of their reception, they would discover that the golden inheritance they had spent 4 years calculating had vanished into thin air, leaving them holding nothing but wedding debt and the ashes of their own greed. At 6:30 in the morning, as the first rays of the Texas sun filtered through my office window blinds, I dialed the direct private number of Robert Mitchell. Robert is 52 years old, senior partner at Mitchell & Associates, and one of the sharpest commercial estate attorneys in the city of Austin. I had worked alongside Robert for nearly a decade, executing joint real estate closings and complex corporate structures. He answered on the second ring, his voice slightly raspy from sleep but alert. "Homer," he asked, checking his caller ID, "it's barely 6:30 in the morning." I heard about your wife passing my friend. I am so deeply sorry. Is everything all right over there? I looked down at the 20 pages of statutory notes and corporate bylaws I had drafted across my desk during the night. Above my head, the floorboards of the second floor began to creak as Jason and Ashley woke up, preparing to spend another day finalizing seat charts and rehearsal dinner menus. Robert, I said cleanly into the receiver, my voice steady and firm. I need you to clear your morning schedule and meet me inside your conference room at 9 o'clock sharp. I am bringing every original property deed, corporate charter, and financial account statement bearing my name. I am establishing an irrevocable charitable foundation, transferring 100% of my real estate and commercial assets into it, and completely drafting a new last will and testament. There was a heavy silence over the telephone line for several seconds. I could hear Robert breathing softly as his legal mind processed the implications of what I was asking. Homer, he said slowly, his tone turning grave and professional. Your son's wedding ceremony is exactly 3 weeks away, on the 29th. And if I am not mistaken, that is the exact same window we were discussing for your wife's memorial service. Yes, I replied coldly. They have officially decided that the Lakeway Resort wedding reception takes priority over burying Jason's mother. They are not attending her funeral, Robert, and they have made it abundantly clear that they are waiting for my heartbeat to stop, so they can gut this house and liquidate my firm. Another silence followed, sharper and heavier than the first. When Robert spoke again, all traces of morning fatigue were gone from his voice, replaced by the crisp, authoritative tone of a master litigator preparing for trial. Bring your banker's box of original files, Homer. Come straight up to the 6th floor of the Frostbank Tower at 9. If we are going to build an asset fortress around your life's work in 20 days, we are going to build it so tight that not even the Supreme Court of Texas could slide a sheet of paper through the cracks. At precisely 8:45 that morning, I walked out of my front door carrying a banker's box containing every deed, title, and ledger of my 35-year career. I drove downtown, parked in the garage of the Frostbank Tower, and rode the elevator up to the 6th floor. Robert was waiting inside his corner conference room, overlooking Congress Avenue, his jacket buttoned, a fresh pot of dark roast coffee steaming on the credenza alongside 2 legal pads. He studied my face intently as I set the heavy box down onto the mahogany table, looking past the dark circles under my eyes to the determination fixed in my posture. Sit down, Homer, Robert said quietly, pulling out a leather chair. Before we draft a single clause, I have to ask you the hard question. Once we execute an irrevocable transfer during your lifetime, conveying your home and business assets to a foundation, you cannot change your mind 5 years from now if your son apologizes. You will remain the controlling lifetime trustee, with absolute authority over how the funds and properties are utilized while you are alive. But upon your death, the assets are locked to the foundation's mission forever. Jason will not receive a dime of equity. Are you 100% prepared to completely sever the financial bridge between you and your only son? I leaned forward across the polished mahogany surface, resting both hands on the box containing my life's labor. Robert, I answered without a split second of hesitation. That bridge was incinerated to ashes the moment Jason stood inside my kitchen and told me that $300,000 in resort catering fees were more important than his mother's casket. I do not have a son anymore. I have a predatory heir living under my roof who is shopping for retirement facilities to dump me into. Let us begin. For the next 4 hours, Robert and I dissected every asset I possessed with surgical precision. We established the official legal framework for the Coleman Family Charitable Foundation, a nonprofit trust dedicated specifically to providing financial, medical, and housing assistance to local working-class families battling terminal cancer, the exact struggle my wife endured with quiet courage. Under our bylaws, I was appointed sole autonomous lifetime trustee, granting me complete operational authority to manage the real estate, sign checks, reside inside the Westlake Drive property, and direct corporate distributions for the entirety of my natural life. Upon my death or incapacity, operational control would not pass to any family member, but rather to a board of independent directors consisting of Robert Mitchell, our corporate CPA, and 3 directors from Austin Cancer Support Services. Next, we drafted the irrevocable quitclaim warranty deed for the residence at 2847 Westlake Drive. Under the statutory phrasing of the deed, all right, title, interest, and equity in the $890,000 property were conveyed and assigned from Homer Coleman directly unto the Coleman Family Charitable Foundation, its successors and assigns forever. Once that deed was recorded with the Travis County Clerk's Office, my home ceased to be personal property that could be inherited through a will or seized in a probate dispute. It became corporate trust property, immune to any claims by heirs or creditors. We executed identical corporate restructuring assignments for Coleman Realty Group, transferring 100% of voting stock and revenue accounts directly into the foundation's holding portfolio. Finally, Robert pulled up the statutory template for my new last will and testament. We inserted a clear, explicit disinheritance clause regarding my son. I hereby leave, bequeath, and devise unto my son, Jason Coleman, the cash sum of $50,000 to be paid from my remaining personal liquid savings. Aside from this specific monetary bequest, I intentionally and with full testamentary capacity leave no other property to Jason Coleman or any spouse he may wed, having already disposed of my primary assets through lifetime trust conveyances. Robert laid down his fountain pen and looked across the stacks of drafted legal instruments. Here is where we guarantee your execution against future lawsuits, he explained, tapping the signature lines. When Jason discovers what you have done, his first reaction, or rather, the reaction of whatever aggressive estate lawyer Ashley's parents hire for him, will be to file a civil suit claiming you were suffering from severe cognitive decline or mental incompetence following your wife's death. They will try to argue that you were not of sound mind when you executed these lifetime transfers. To make these documents impervious to a legal challenge, we need 3 independent witnesses who have known you for years, who can testify under oath that you were sharp, calm, and acting of your own free will, and who are not beneficiaries of the foundation. I nodded slowly, scanning my circle of professional colleagues across Austin. You will be our primary legal witness, Robert, I said. For our second witness, I want Virginia Porter, my senior private banker at Austin First Bank. She has managed my commercial accounts for 12 years and knows my financial clarity intimately. And for our third witness, I want Carol Harris, the owner of Harris Memorial Services, where my wife's funeral is being held. Carol served on 2 charity boards alongside my wife for 5 years and knows what Jason is doing to our family right now. A seasoned estate lawyer, a senior commercial banker, and a licensed funeral director, Robert said with a genuine smile of professional admiration. If a probate judge sees those 3 signatures attesting to your mental capacity on the exact day these instruments are notarized, any lawsuit Jason files will be thrown out of court with prejudice before the initial hearing even finishes. Now, let us coordinate our exact execution timeline. We laid out the 20-day calendar, stretching between that morning and the fateful Saturday of March 29th. Robert's office would immediately file the Articles of Incorporation for the foundation with the Texas Secretary of State via expedited processing. By the following Wednesday, once federal tax identification numbers were issued, I would sit down with Virginia Porter at Austin First Bank to open corporate accounts and schedule electronic transfers. And on the morning of Saturday, March 29th, while Jason and Ashley were adjusting their veils inside the bridal suites of the Lakeway Resort Robart, Virginia, Carol, and I would convene inside the private conference room of the funeral home immediately following my wife's memorial service to execute, witness, and electronically file the final irrevocable deed recordings and bank transfers. And here is the psychological masterpiece of your timeline, Robert noted, pointing his pen at the evening hours on March 29th. The county recording system and our commercial banking network allow us to schedule and batch our official electronic notification transmissions. We will set the automated email alerts from the bank, the county clerk, and my legal office to fire simultaneously at exactly 9 o'clock post-meridian on Saturday evening. By 9 o'clock, the wedding ceremony will be concluded, the photographs will be taken, and Jason and Ashley will be standing in the middle of the Lakeway Grand Ballroom, enjoying their 5-tier cake and champagne toasts. That is the exact moment their smartphones will receive the official legal documentation, confirming that their inheritance is zero. I gathered my copies of the draft bylaws, placed them inside my briefcase, and shook Robert's hand. When I stepped out of the Frost Bank Tower and walked across the sunlit concrete of Congress Avenue toward my car, the suffocating weight that had crushed my chest for 4 days was gone. I was no longer a helpless, grieving old man being shoved into the shadows of his own house by a greedy son and an entitled daughter-in-law. I was a master notary operating on my own turf, executing a flawless legal procedure that would teach two selfish, arrogant human beings the hardest, most permanent lesson of their lives. Let them plan their $300,000 wedding. Let them select their imported champagne and polish their designer shoes. The wedding was coming, but so was Judgment Day. Over the next 20 days, our residence on Westlake Drive became a theater of two opposite realities operating under one roof. Upstairs, Jason and Ashley lived in wedding euphoria, coordinating crystal centerpieces, organic linen napkins, and champagne selections over speakerphone. The downstairs foyer was blocked by boxes of custom-embossed menus and imported favors. Whenever I passed Ashley in the hallway, she looked through me as if I were aging furniture, while Jason cast guilty glances whenever her back was turned. He never paused his celebrations to ask how my heart was coping as his mother's burial drew closer. Downstairs, inside my small room and office, I moved through legal tasks with the quiet precision of a surgeon. While they spent afternoons tasting cake tiers and choosing orchestra set lists, I spent my mornings inside Austin First Bank with Virginia Porter. With my notarized authorization, Virginia reviewed every ledger and money market fund under my name, unlinking my $680,000 in liquid savings from the joint family banking umbrella, where Jason previously enjoyed viewing rights. We wired every dollar directly into the accounts of the Coleman Family Charitable Foundation. As Virginia stamped the confirmation slips with her official seal, she looked across her desk with respect and noted that my son had no idea what kind of financial hurricane he was walking straight into. During those quiet evenings, while Jason and Ashley dined out with their bridal party, I retreated to my backyard workshop surrounded by the aroma of wood shavings, oak stain, and mineral spirits. Carpentry had always been my sanctuary during emotional turmoil. I spent hours joining pieces of dark mahogany to build a consultation table that I intended to gift to Carol Harris for the family conference room at Harris Memorial Services. Whenever my hands needed a break, I sat at my workbench polishing the small, velvet-lined cherry wood memory box I built for my wife, placing inside it our early love letters, her silver locket, and a photograph from our 25th anniversary in Galveston. Every stroke of sandpaper reinforced the absolute clarity of my mission. 3 days before Saturday, March 29th, Jason walked into the kitchen while I prepared evening tea, his eyes hovering on my work boots. Ashley was upstairs packing designer suitcases for their upcoming honeymoon in the French Riviera. My son paused awkwardly near the refrigerator, claiming that although things had been tense regarding the Lakeway Resort schedule, we would sit down after their trip to review estate management numbers and establish a new household rhythm. I turned around slowly holding my warm teacup and looked into his eyes with a calm smile that held zero anger, only the deep certainty of a man holding every winning card in the deck. I softly told him that he didn't need to worry about estate figures and that we would actually be seeing each other much sooner than he anticipated, encouraging him to enjoy his rehearsal dinner before Ashley called him away to carry garment bags. The morning of Saturday, March 29th, dawned brilliantly blue and cloudless, the exact sunlit spring morning my wife loved for planting tulips. I rose at 5 o'clock, showered, and dressed with reverent care, pulling from my closet the dark charcoal suit I wore 20 years ago to our daughter's college graduation before we lost her to an accident. I fastened my father's silver cufflinks, knotted the deep burgundy tie my wife gave me for our 40th anniversary, and carried the polished cherry wood memory box through the empty hallways. Jason and Ashley had departed for the Lakeway Resort Suites the previous afternoon, pulling their luxury luggage across the floors of a home that, by noon today, would belong entirely to charity. I arrived at Harris Memorial Services at 9 o'clock, an hour ahead of the 10 o'clock service. Carol Harris stood near the chapel altar, directing staff as they arranged white rose wreaths around my wife's mahogany casket. Carol took both of my hands in hers, whispering with sympathy that the chapel was immaculate and dignified, exactly as my wife deserved. At 9:30, Robert Mitchell arrived carrying briefcases of finalized legal instruments, followed 10 minutes later by Virginia Porter in a dark suit. Over the next 20 minutes, 5 elderly couples walked slowly down the aisle. The devoted working-class friends from my wife's cancer support group who brought casseroles during chemotherapy and sat with us in sterile hospital waiting rooms when her blood counts dropped. When the organist began playing my wife's favorite classical hymn at 10 o'clock, I took my seat in the center of the front row, directly before her casket. Behind me, and to my right, stretched 8 completely vacant, reserved wooden pews set aside for immediate family for Jason, for Ashley, for Richard and Patricia Stewart, and for the wedding party that should have stood shoulder to shoulder with a grieving husband. In that quiet chapel, those 8 empty chairs screamed louder than any spoken eulogy. Right during the opening prayer, my phone vibrated inside my pocket, with a text from Jason exclaiming that the coordinator said the ceremony started in 4 hours and that he couldn't believe his special day was finally here. I stared at his message for 3 seconds, powered the device off completely, and turned my eyes toward my wife's white roses. Following the deeply moving memorial service, filled with shared readings and tears from her support group, Robert, Virginia, Carol, and I adjourned into the soundproofed legal conference room at the rear of the mortuary at 11:30. Robert spread our legal documents across the conference table with practiced efficiency, pointing out my new last will, leaving Jason exactly $50,000 in cash, the irrevocable quitclaim warranty deed, transferring 2847 Westlake Drive to the Coleman Family Charitable Foundation, and the corporate assignments, conveying 100% of Coleman Realty Group's voting stock and commercial accounts. Carol and Virginia stood opposite across the table, ready to perform statutory duties as independent witnesses, while Robert asked one final time if I was ready to permanently lock every dollar away from my son. I answered without hesitation that I had never been more certain of anything in my life, taking the brass fountain pen to sign my name across each parchment with crisp authority. As I finished each instrument, Robert slid it across the table to Carol and Virginia, who affixed signatures as independent witnesses before Robert applied his official embossed notary seal. Signature, witness, seal done. One by one, 35 years of personal real estate equity and corporate wealth transformed into an impregnable charity fortress. When the final document was sealed at 12 o'clock noon, Robert announced that he was uploading the digital filings directly into the Travis County Clerk's recording portal and the Secretary of State Registry. He confirmed the county recorder would have the deed transferred by 1 o'clock. Virginia's banking team would complete the corporate account migrations by 2 o'clock, and our automated notification system was pre-programmed to transmit the complete legal files and account closures to Jason and Ashley's emails at exactly 9 o'clock tonight during their reception. Carol touched my arm gently, asking if I wanted to call Jason before tonight to give him one last chance, but I shook my head firmly, explaining that he made his absolute choice when he scheduled his wedding over his mother's casket, and now had to live with the harvest he planted. Under the shade of 2 live oak trees at Austin Memorial Park Cemetery at 1 o'clock, we lowered my wife into the green earth. I knelt beside her headstone, placed the velvet-lined cherry wood memory box at the base of the granite marker, and whispered my final promises to her spirit. Surrounded by the handful of true friends who had stood by us through thick and thin, I felt a sacred resolve settle over my soul, knowing her memory was now enshrined within a trust that would save the lives of hundreds of struggling families across Texas. Returning to my Westlake Drive residence at 2 o'clock, I unlocked the front door and felt the enormous, silent emptiness of the rooms, knowing it was finally my emptiness now and not Jason's. I brewed dark roast coffee, sat at my office desk, and watched the digital clock on my phone when a text arrived from Margaret, a family friend who attended the morning funeral and later joined the Lakeway wedding without realizing Jason's betrayal. Attached was a photo of Jason and Ashley, standing under an arch of white roses and orchids, holding champagne flutes toward the ceiling, with the caption exclaiming how blissfully happy and carefree they looked. I stared at my son, who should have been shoveling dirt onto his mother's grave an hour ago, but was instead preparing to cut a 5-tier cake. I looked at Ashley, the woman who dismissed my 35-year marriage as an inconvenient obstacle to her remodeling plans. I set a countdown timer for 6 hours and 15 minutes until 9 o'clock, and walked out to my workshop to sand oak while afternoon light stretched across the yard. At 8:30, while cleaning sawdust from my hands at the kitchen sink, Robert Mitchell called from his downtown office to report that every deed and banking account had been fully indexed and migrated. He confirmed the automated email notifications were queued inside the Outbox server, scheduled to fire simultaneously at 9 o'clock post-meridian to hit Jason, Ashley, and Richard Stewart with certified notices confirming their inheritance was 0. I calmly told him to let the emails fly, hung up the receiver, checked my countdown timer showing 28 minutes remaining, and ate a small plate of leftover casserole at my desk without tasting a bite. Holding the 25th anniversary photograph of my wife in my hands, I whispered gently to her face that while I was sorry if this wasn't what she would have wanted, some lessons in this world could only be learned by tearing away the safety net. When the countdown timer hit absolute 0 at 9 o'clock post-meridian, I leaned back in my leather chair, closed my eyes, and pictured 200 wealthy guests laughing around candlelit tables inside the Lakeway Grand Ballroom while the jazz orchestra played swing music. I imagined Jason's phone buzzing once, twice, 10 times in rapid succession, right beside Ashley's smartphone on the white tablecloth. I unmuted my ringer, set the volume to maximum, placed the device squarely in the center of my desk, and watched the digital onslaught begin at exactly 3 minutes past 9. 47 missed phone calls registered across my screen in under 30 minutes while Jason's frantic voicemails stacked up inside my inbox. I sat with my hands folded patiently across my lap, letting him experience over half an hour of raw terror, before finally reaching across my desk at 35 minutes past 9 to swipe the green answer icon on the 48th call. Jason's voice exploded through the speaker as a high-pitched, hyperventilating shriek of pure panic, asking what the hell I had just done to his bank accounts and house deeds. Keeping my tone level, smooth, and pleasantly casual, I asked him how the ballroom reception was going and whether his guests enjoyed the gourmet cake. Gasping for air as if he were suffocating, Jason screamed that he just received certified emails from Austin First Bank and the county recorder stating our checking accounts were closed and our entire Westlake Drive residence was deeded to a charitable foundation right in the middle of his reception. I answered cleanly with razor-sharp precision, asking where he had been today while I attended his mother's funeral alone. Hearing Ashley screaming hysterically in the background among confused guests, Jason cried out that I couldn't transfer their equity because the property and business were their future inheritance, and promised they were calling Marcus Thompson to reverse everything immediately. I explained with icy notarial clarity that under Texas civil law, a competent adult citizen has the absolute right to convey his property during his lifetime. Confirming that at noon today, witnessed by 3 independent professionals, I executed an irrevocable deed, transferring everything to the Coleman Family Charitable Foundation to assist working-class families battling terminal cancer. Ashley grabbed the receiver from Jason, shrieking that they had $340,000 in resort contracts to pay off this month, and accusing me of stealing their property, right before I coldly reminded her that it was Jason's potential inheritance only until she made it clear catering deposits were more important than burying his mother. When Jason reclaimed the phone weeping and begging me not to lock them out so they could drive over to figure something out, I softly told him I was far too tired after burying his mother alone, while he danced under a flower arch. I declared we would not figure anything out and ordered him to live with the exact consequences of his decision before terminating the call, locking my powered-down smartphone inside my desk drawer and stepping out to my backyard workshop. Looking up at the starlit Texas sky above the clean smell of sawdust, I felt a deep peace wash over my ribs knowing strict legal justice had finally been executed under my roof, and allowed myself one quiet, genuine smile. Waking up Sunday morning at 7 o'clock to the blessed silence of a home free from wedding chaos, I cooked scrambled eggs at the kitchen island before unlocking my desk drawer at 9 o'clock to power my smartphone back on. The screen erupted with over 80 missed calls, 30 voicemails, and frantic texts from Jason documenting his rapid psychological descent from furious denial to sheer panic, including messages warning that Richard Stewart was threatening to sue for fraud and that their credit cards were declining at the hotel desk. I calmly deleted every message without listening to a second of audio and poured fresh coffee just as the doorbell rang with 3 aggressive chimes, accompanied by heavy fists pounding against my solid oak door. Looking through the sidelight window, I saw Jason's BMW parked sideways across my concrete driveway, while Jason stood on the porch wearing his wrinkled tuxedo, his silk bow tie undone and his haggard face pale from a sleepless night. Ashley stood directly behind him with her designer dress rumpled, her bridal hair falling apart, and her mascara smeared darkly beneath her eyes, transforming the camera-ready couple into a desperate wreck. I turned the deadbolt and opened the door 2 feet with the brass security chain latched tightly, standing squarely in the gap, as Jason croaked a hoarse plea, asking me to let them inside so they could talk about the disaster. I replied evenly with my hands in my slacks pockets that our property discussion occurred over the phone last night, and that the house now belonged exclusively to the foundation. Running both trembling hands through his hair, Jason cried that transferring the house, business, and accounts left them sitting under $340,000 of catering and venue bills that they needed inheritance equity to collateralize. I cut through his panic cleanly, reminding him that our foundation would directly fund mortgage and medical assistance for families whose loved ones were dying of cancer, families who actually stick together during critical times instead of abandoning a grieving widower to bury his wife alone while they drink champagne. When Jason wept in shame admitting his mistake, but claiming I was destroying his future over one error, I stepped closer to the screen door, with narrowing eyes to dissect his mistake. I laid out the raw facts right to his face, how he moved into my home uninvited and treated me like a janitor, forced his dying mother out of her spacious bedroom so his girlfriend could store dresses, counted down the days until my death to remodel floorboards, and declared his mother's burial wasn't worth forfeiting catering deposits because she was already gone. Pushing past Jason's shoulder, Ashley shrieked and pointed her manicured finger at my face, demanding I reverse the trust transfers immediately because her father was livid after discovering our account closures at breakfast. With detached amusement, I raised one eyebrow asking why I should pay for her wedding bar tab, suggesting she ask her wealthy father Richard Stewart to liquidate one of his car dealerships to cover the $300,000 debt. Ashley turned chalky white and stammered in a panicked whisper that her father leveraged his dealership assets last year to open 2 new lots in San Antonio and didn't have liquid cash sitting around, admitting they charged everything on high-interest credit lines because Jason promised my estate was worth over $1 million and that I was so old and grief-stricken I would pass away soon or sign over power of attorney after the wedding. I turned toward my son, who was staring at his bride in paralyzed horror, calmly asking whether they ever factored his mother's casket and burial plot into their living room wine calculations, or simply assumed old Homer would silently cover those expenses while they spent his life savings on floral arches. Jason gasped without producing a sound as Ashley grabbed his tuxedo lapels, her socialite facade completely shattering as she screamed right into his face that he lied to her about how controllable and weak I was. Spit flew from her lips as she shrieked that she married him specifically for my real estate holdings and commercial business equity, calling their marriage an investment, and furious that she now faced a $50,000 will consolation prize and a mountain of suffocating debt. Jason froze in utter devastation, whispering in shock as he asked if she truly married him for money and viewed their relationship as a financial investment, right before Ashley screamed back, calling him an idiot and admitting she could have married anyone at the country club, but chose him because he bragged about inheriting an $890,000 house and $1 million firm. Slowly turning his bloodshot eyes away from his screaming bride toward the gap in my doorway, Jason whispered a broken apology, reaching his hand out as the crushing realization settled over his shoulders that he sacrificed his mother's comfort and abandoned her burial for a shallow gold digger who viewed him as a walking bank account. I softly told him to take his bride and drive back to his hotel, because no words could undo what he did yesterday, and no legal instrument in Texas would reverse our foundation, ordering him home to figure out how to pay his own debts. Ashley yanked his arm viciously, snapping that they were calling aggressive estate litigator Marcus Thompson right now to file an emergency injunction, freezing my bank accounts for fraud and mental incompetence before noon on Monday, before I firmly closed the heavy oak door in their faces and turned the deadbolt. Through the sidelight window, I watched Jason and Ashley argue beside their BMW for 15 minutes before Ashley slammed the passenger door and Jason reversed out of my driveway, speeding down Westlake Drive toward financial ruin. Walking straight down the hallway to my office desk, I called Robert Mitchell, who chuckled into the phone, asking for my morning report. When I told him, Ashley announced they were hiring Marcus Thompson tomorrow morning to freeze our accounts for mental incompetence and fraud. Robert let out a booming laugh that echoed through my office, calling Marcus an overpriced theatrical performer who charged $700 an hour to file inflated motions that wouldn't survive a preliminary hearing. Robert assured me that the moment Marcus submitted his paperwork to the court clerk on Monday morning, our office would serve the district judge with our certified time-stamped execution package containing the sworn affidavits of a senior commercial attorney, a private bank vice president, and a licensed funeral director attesting under oath to my absolute cognitive clarity and testamentary capacity. He predicted the judge would toss Marcus's lawsuit out of court with prejudice before the ink dried, leaving Jason stuck paying Marcus's $25,000 retainer fee out of his own empty pocket. 4 days later, on Thursday morning, Marcus Thompson officially filed a 40-page civil lawsuit in Travis County District Court, claiming severe emotional distress, dementia, undue influence, and fraud, right before Robert filed our motion to dismiss, accompanied by our 3 witness affidavits and statutory trust registration for an expedited judicial review in chambers. While the legal filings wound through district court over the next week, the social and professional fallout of Jason's choices exploded across Austin with devastating velocity. Within 48 hours, the public lawsuit records informed the entire commercial real estate and banking community that Jason Coleman skipped his mother's funeral for a luxury wedding party and got outmaneuvered by his 67-year-old father, who deeded everything to charity. Within 5 days, 3 of Jason's largest corporate wealth management clients called his firm's managing directors and abruptly terminated their portfolio accounts, explicitly stating they could never trust their savings to a consultant with such catastrophic moral judgment. By Friday afternoon, 5 more high-net-worth clients pulled over $3 million in managed capital out of Jason's division, before senior partners called him into the executive boardroom on Monday morning to place him on mandatory leave, which effectively terminated his corporate career because his personal brand had become toxic sludge. Meanwhile, inside Austin high society, Patricia Stewart found herself quietly uninvited from Tuesday Country Club charity luncheons, while Richard Stewart noticed banking partners and golf associates suddenly refusing his calls regarding dealership expansions, sending a clear message that their family raised a predatory daughter who treated a grieving widower like an ATM. 8 days post-wedding, realizing Jason's accounts were permanently frozen under $340,000 of vendor debts, Ashley Stewart filed legal petitions for an emergency annulment, citing financial fraud and intentional misrepresentation of net worth, packing her wardrobes and fleeing to Dallas for a receptionist job far away from Austin gossip. Exactly 2 weeks after my wife's funeral on Wednesday morning, Robert Mitchell forwarded the official written opinion issued by the Travis County District Court judge dismissing Marcus Thompson's lawsuit with prejudice. The judge's ruling was scathing and absolute, declaring the plaintiffs failed to present a shred of credible evidence demonstrating mental incompetence or undue influence, while affirming that under Texas property statutes, a competent adult citizen possesses the absolute legal right to convey his property to a charitable trust during his lifetime, without judicial interference when relatives disagree with his choices. That dismissal ordered Jason to pay all statutory court costs, adding another $8,000 right on top of Marcus Thompson's $25,000 legal bill, while wedding vendor lawsuits defaulted his credit cards. 2 days after the judicial dismissal, Jason arrived in my driveway alongside a commercial locksmith's van while I sat inside my home office after lunch. Watching through my window as Jason, looking unshaven, disheveled, and completely broken, walked onto my covered porch, alongside a middle-aged locksmith carrying a heavy tool bag, I opened the front door cleanly before the man touched his picks to my deadbolt. When the locksmith politely explained that Jason claimed to be a resident who misplaced his keys, I handed the tradesman a certified corporate folder containing our foundation deed registration and statutory notice of trespass, calmly informing him that I was lifetime trustee Homer Coleman, and that Jason Coleman was neither tenant, resident, nor owner of this commercial trust property. I warned the locksmith that attempting to drill or alter my entrance locks would constitute commercial felony breaking and entering under Texas law, prompting the tradesman to inspect the state seal and trespass warning before instantly snapping his tool bag shut. Glaring at Jason with absolute disgust, the locksmith snapped at him, asking if he was out of his mind bringing a contractor to break into a corporate trust property without a lease or deed, warning him never to call his service number again before storming to his van and speeding down the driveway. Left standing alone on the concrete porch steps with tears pouring down his cheeks, Jason slowly turned toward me, whispering brokenly that Ashley annulled their marriage. His firm fired him. All 15 wealth clients vanished, and wedding vendors were hitting his mailbox with $300,000 lawsuits every day while his credit collapsed. Weeping with racking sobs, Jason confessed he had to sell his BMW just to pay Marcus Thompson's retainer fees to avoid check-bouncing jail, admitting he was living in a $50 motel room off the interstate, without enough grocery money, and had lost literally everything he cared about. Looking down from my porch at the boy, who promised his mother at high school graduation to make her proud every day of his life, I felt a sharp pang of paternal sorrow anchored beneath the bedrock of absolute justice. I gently told him he hadn't lost everything, because he still had $50,000 coming from my last will whenever I passed away, alongside his college degree and physical health, explaining that what he lost today was the unearned luxury, superficial status, and golden safety net he attempted to steal by dancing across his mother's grave. Dropping to his knees on the concrete steps, with his face buried inside his trembling hands, Jason wept openly into the afternoon air, apologizing for skipping the funeral and wishing he could hold her hand one last time. I softly reminded him that understanding his actions today didn't restrict his mother, and regret didn't erase the choices he made when he thought he held all the power, declaring I was no longer angry at him, but that consequences were the only true teachers in this world. I encouraged him to move to Houston, find an entry-level job, rent a humble room, pay off his debts $20 at a time, and start building a real life based on hard work and character instead of inheritance before stepping inside my home, turning the deadbolt, and returning to my workshop to finish building Carol's table. On a bright sunny Tuesday morning in early June 2 months later, I hosted the inaugural Board of Directors meeting for the Coleman Family Charitable Foundation inside the private conference room at Harris Memorial Services, surrounded by Robert Mitchell, Carol Harris, and 3 dedicated directors from Austin Cancer Support Services, including my wife's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Wong. Opening our financial ledger, I announced the formal approval and distribution of our inaugural cancer assistance grants totaling $120,000 before passing around verified medical applicant files. We approved 6 full months of mortgage payments and medical copays for the Martinez family, where a working-class father of 3 with pancreatic cancer faced eviction, issued a $15,000 grant to clear utility debts and fund childcare for single mother Mrs. Johnson battling breast cancer, and financed experimental immunotherapy treatments at MD Anderson Cancer Center for 16-year-old Williams battling acute leukemia. The board voted unanimously to approve every grant without hesitation, and relief checks were dispatched that exact afternoon. Less than 7 days later, 3 handwritten thank you cards arrived in my mailbox, including a note from Mrs. Martinez exclaiming that our foundation saved her family from moving into a homeless shelter and allowed her husband to stop weeping over bills to focus entirely on healing for their little girls. I pinned her letter directly above my office desk lamp, reading her words whenever lonely evenings brought lingering grief over Jason's departure to remember with absolute clarity that lifting up struggling families was what family equity was supposed to accomplish in this world. A week later, a senior investigative reporter from the Austin American-Statesman interviewed me inside my living room at Robert's urging, publishing a massive Sunday front-page feature story titled, "Austin Real Estate Veteran Establishes $1 Million Foundation to Honor Late Wife's Battle with Cancer." The article detailed my 42-year marriage, praised our initial $120,000 grant distributions, and gently highlighted the philosophy that true legacy is measured by lives lifted up during crisis. While the article respectfully omitted Jason's name, every prominent citizen read between the lines, prompting over $43,000 in unsolicited community donations to pour into our foundation accounts from inspired readers across Texas over the next 30 days. In late June, 3 months after my wife's passing, a plain envelope bearing a Houston postmark arrived in my mailbox containing a 2-page letter written across cheap ruled paper in Jason's messy handwriting. My son wrote that he wasn't asking for money or begging for forgiveness, explaining he moved to Houston 6 weeks ago for an entry-level insurance claims, job making $42,000 a year, renting a $500 room inside a shared house, and paying off wedding vendor lawsuits $50 at a time out of every paycheck. He described reading the Sunday front-page article about our foundation in his break room and breaking down crying before his coworkers, after seeing how we saved the Martinez and Johnson families using his mother's estate, calling himself an arrogant monster who thought the world owed him a golden platter, and promising to work every single day for the rest of his life to become a man of character his mother would actually be proud of. Reading his letter twice as bitter layers of betrayal softened inside my chest, I folded the ruled pages and placed them inside my desk drawer, alongside his mother's reading glasses, without writing a reply or calling his Houston number. True, lasting character transformation is forged across years of quiet consistency, rather than a single letter written during hardship, and perhaps in 3 or 4 years, when the foundation has expanded, and Jason has proven his resilience through honest labor, I will open my door and invite him inside for a cup of coffee. But right now, he was exactly where he needed to be, learning how to stand on his own 2 feet without a safety net. Driving out to Austin Memorial Park Cemetery late that afternoon, as the golden sun dipped toward the horizon, I knelt beside my wife's granite headstone with fresh white roses and placed the polished cherry wood memory box across the grass with its inscription facing upward. "Family is not blood. Family is choice." Sitting alone in the peaceful cemetery breeze, speaking softly to her spirit about our foundation grants, the mothers we saved from eviction, and the lessons our son was learning in Houston. A warm wind stirred the oak leaves, carrying the profound sensation of her quiet, loving approval. The high society wedding was long over, the superficial inheritance was permanently gone, and the broken family tree had been pruned to its roots. But as I stood up to join Robert and Carol for dinner, I felt a deep, enduring peace anchor my soul, knowing strict justice had been served under Texas law, and that out of betrayal, we had built a living monument of hope that would endure for generations to come. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.